I'm Dana, 32 years old, and a marketing manager at Apex Technologies. My 5-year work anniversary was coming up, and I'd been hoping this performance review with Marcus would finally lead to that promotion I deserved. But as I sat in his glass-walled office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't react. Your boss is recording everything." I kept my face neutral while my heart raced. Something about the phone positioned on his desk suddenly felt very wrong. If you've ever received a text that completely changed the course of your day, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button before we continue this wild workplace story. Apex Technologies had been my professional home for nearly 5 years. Located in a sleek downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and open-concept workspaces, it projected the image of innovation and success. The company specialized in digital marketing solutions, and I'd climbed from entry-level content creator to marketing manager through sheer determination and countless late nights. The walls were adorned with motivational quotes about hustle culture and going the extra mile, which initially inspired me, but gradually revealed themselves as expectations rather than aspirations. The work environment at Apex was notoriously competitive. Our CEO, Richard, often referenced natural selection in company meetings, suggesting that only the strongest would survive and thrive. This philosophy trickled down through management and created an atmosphere where employees guarded their projects jealously and viewed colleagues as potential threats rather than teammates. I'd seen plenty of talented people burn out and leave, but I'd persisted believing my dedication would eventually be recognized. My closest ally at Apex was Emily from accounting. We'd started around the same time and bonded over being the only 2 people who brought lunch from home rather than ordering expensive delivery with the rest of the team. Emily was petite with curly auburn hair and glasses that frequently slipped down her nose. She had a quiet competence that made her invaluable to the company but also easy to overlook. We often joked that the accounting department was where they hid all the people who actually kept the company running while the sales and marketing teams took all the credit. Then there was Ryan, my most direct competition for the senior marketing position that had opened up when our previous department head Linda suddenly resigned 2 months ago. Ryan had joined Apex just a year after me, and while I couldn't deny his talent, his methods sometimes crossed ethical lines. He had a habit of taking credit for team efforts and minimizing others' contributions during meetings. With his perfectly styled brown hair and custom-tailored suits, he looked the part of corporate success that our image-conscious company valued. Jessica from Human Resources completed the core cast of characters in my daily work life. Tall, blonde, and always impeccably dressed, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew everyone's secrets. As the company's HR director, she certainly had access to enough personal information to make that true. Jessica and Marcus, my direct supervisor, often had lunch together and seemed unusually close for colleagues from different departments. I'd occasionally catch them in hushed conversations that abruptly ended when others approached. My relationship with Marcus had evolved significantly over the years. When I first joined his team, he'd been encouraging and somewhat mentoring, recognizing my potential and assigning me projects that showcased my strengths. He was in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and a preference for casual business attire that made him seem more approachable than other executives. I'd initially appreciated his direct communication style, but over the past year his demands had grown increasingly unreasonable and his feedback more critical than constructive. The shift in our professional relationship coincided with several major successes I'd achieved for the company. The social media campaign I'd designed for our flagship product had gone viral, resulting in a 30% increase in sales. I'd also secured a partnership with a major influencer that competitors had been courting for months. These wins had put me in the spotlight during company meetings, which I suspected might have triggered Marcus's change in attitude. As his direct report, my successes reflected well on him, but perhaps he worried I might outshine him or even pursue his position. In the weeks leading up to my performance review, I'd noticed several concerning incidents. Files I was certain I'd saved on the secure company server were mysteriously missing or altered. During team meetings, Marcus referenced conversations we'd supposedly had that I couldn't recall. Twice I overheard him telling Ryan about projects I was leading, as if they were collaborative efforts or primarily Ryan's responsibility. Most disturbing was catching Marcus and Jessica exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking the kind of nonverbal communication that suggested a shared secret. Once I entered the break room to find them examining something on Jessica's tablet only for her to quickly switch screens when they noticed me. Despite these red flags, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Workplace stress and the pressure of potentially earning a promotion were making me hypersensitive to normal office dynamics. Marcus had hired me after all, and had championed my ideas in the past. I'd invested too much of myself in this company to believe my own supervisor would actively work against me. The morning of my performance review, I'd dressed with particular care, selecting a navy blue pantsuit that projected confidence and professionalism. I'd arrived early to prepare my portfolio of accomplishments and practiced responses to potential questions about areas for improvement. My stomach was in knots, but I reminded myself that objective results should speak for themselves. The campaign metrics were exceptional. Client feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and I'd consistently met or exceeded my targets. As I walked toward Marcus's glass-walled office at exactly 10 o'clock, I noticed Ryan watching me from his desk with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't quite smug, more like anticipatory. Jessica was also hovering near the executive suite, ostensibly organizing files, but positioned perfectly to observe Marcus's office. Their presence added to my nervous energy, but I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and knocked on the door with more confidence than I felt. "Come in, Dana," Marcus called, his voice pleasant but somehow performative, right on time as always. I stepped into his office, noting how he'd positioned his chair to face the door, directly creating the impression of a judge behind a bench rather than a collaborative meeting between colleagues. My gut tightened with apprehension as I crossed the threshold, unable to shake the feeling that I was walking into something more consequential than a routine performance review. Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Please make yourself comfortable. I've been looking forward to this conversation." There was something off about his demeanor. Marcus typically started our meetings with casual small talk about weekend plans or industry news, but today he was all business. His posture was unusually rigid, and he maintained an intensity in his gaze that made me uncomfortable. "Thank you for making time for this," I said, settling into the chair and placing my portfolio on my lap. "I've prepared a summary of my projects and results from the past year." "That's very thorough of you," he replied, but made no move to take the folder I offered. "But I have all the information I need right here." He patted a manila folder on his desk, labeled with my name. I withdrew my hand, trying not to show my confusion. The folder looked suspiciously thin for a comprehensive performance review. "Let's start with the positives," Marcus began, his tone suddenly warm and encouraging. "Your technical skills are excellent, and you clearly understand our target demographics. The Nielsen data shows your campaigns consistently outperform industry benchmarks." The praise sounded rehearsed, as if he was reading from a script rather than speaking from personal observation. While he talked, I noticed his phone positioned oddly on the desk. It was propped against his water bottle, the camera lens facing directly toward me. A red recording indicator light blinked steadily. I appreciate that I responded carefully. The last quarter was particularly challenging with the budget constraints, but we managed to increase engagement by 22% while actually reducing ad spend. Marcus nodded absently, typing something on his laptop. "Yes, that's in my notes. Tell me about the Riverside project. How do you feel that went?" I paused, momentarily confused. The Riverside campaign had been Ryan's project, not mine. I'd provided some initial input during brainstorming, but hadn't been involved in the execution. The Riverside project was primarily Ryan's initiative, I clarified. I was focused on the Henderson account during that time frame. Marcus looked up from his screen with an expression of mild surprise. "That's not what the project documentation indicates. According to the files, you had significant input on strategy decisions that ultimately underperformed." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I was certain I hadn't been credited on those files, nor had I made any strategic decisions for that campaign. "There must be some mistake," I said carefully. "I can show you the allocation of my billable hours for that period, which were almost exclusively dedicated to Henderson." Marcus made a note on his laptop, his expression unreadable. "We can circle back to that. Let's discuss some of the feedback I've received from your colleagues." He flipped open the folder and pulled out a printed sheet. "Several team members have expressed concerns about communication issues. Specifically, they mentioned you withholding critical information and taking credit for collaborative work." I struggled to maintain my composure. These accusations were completely unfounded and sounded suspiciously like behaviors I'd observed in Ryan. I'm surprised to hear that I said keeping my voice steady. I've always prioritized transparent communication and proper attribution. Could you tell me which specific incidents they're referring to? I'm afraid that would violate confidentiality, Marcus replied smoothly. But there have been multiple reports which establishes a pattern worth addressing. The review continued in this vein, with Marcus presenting distorted versions of projects I'd worked on and criticisms that seemed manufactured rather than genuine. He referenced errors in reports that I knew had been correct when I submitted them, and meetings where I'd supposedly made commitments I had no recollection of making. Throughout this bewildering conversation, Marcus maintained uncomfortable eye contact while continuing to type notes. I felt increasingly disoriented, as if we were discussing someone else's performance entirely. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I normally would never check messages during a meeting, but given how off-kilter this review had become, I glanced down briefly while Marcus consulted his notes. The preview notification on my screen made my blood run cold. Unknown number, don't react. Your boss is recording everything to build a case for term. The message cut off there, but its implication was clear. I forced my expression to remain neutral, though my heart hammered in my chest. Is everything okay? Marcus asked, his tone suggesting mild concern while his eyes remained calculating. Yes, just a reminder for a doctor appointment next week, I lied smoothly. Please continue. Marcus launched into a critique of my leadership style, claiming I was too controlling with junior team members. This accusation was particularly absurd, given how much time I'd invested in mentoring our newest hires, several of whom had specifically thanked me for my supportive approach. As he spoke, I noticed his phone had been repositioned slightly, as if to ensure it captured my reactions clearly. There was also what appeared to be a small black object partially hidden behind a stack of books on his shelf, possibly another recording device. The realization that this entire review might be an elaborate setup made it difficult to focus on responding appropriately. I needed space to think and verify the warning message. Would you excuse me for a moment? I asked when Marcus paused. I need to use the restroom briefly. He seemed annoyed by the interruption but nodded curtly. Of course, let's reconvene in 5 minutes. I walked calmly out of his office, maintaining my professional demeanor until I was safely around the corner. Then I practically ran to the women's restroom, locked myself in a stall, and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The full message read, "Don't react. Your boss is recording everything to build a case for termination, not promotion. Marcus and Jessica have been altering your work and creating false documentation. This isn't paranoia. Be careful what you admit to or sign. I want to help." I stared at the text, my mind racing. Who could have sent this? Was it legitimate or some cruel prank? If I hadn't already noticed the suspicious positioning of Marcus's phone and the strange direction of the review, I might have dismissed it entirely. But too many pieces were falling into place. Over the past month, there had been numerous small incidents that had made me uncomfortable, but weren't significant enough on their own to raise alarms. The missing client report that Marcus later claimed I never submitted. The strategy document that somehow included approaches I'd specifically advised against. The team meeting where Ryan presented ideas identical to ones I'd shared privately with Marcus the previous day. Each incident could be explained away as a misunderstanding, a technical glitch, or coincidence. But viewed collectively through the lens of this warning, they formed a disturbing pattern. I thought back to Linda's abrupt departure 2 months ago. She'd been with the company for 7 years and was widely respected, yet she left without a goodbye lunch or even an announcement. When I asked about it, Jessica had simply said it was a personal decision and changed the subject. Had Linda faced a similar situation? Taking a deep breath, I decided to treat the warning as legitimate, until proven otherwise. If it was true, Marcus was trying to document supposed performance issues to justify firing me. If it was false, being cautious wouldn't hurt my position anyway. I quickly formulated a strategy. First, I would return to the review and carefully observe Marcus's behavior for further evidence. Second, I would avoid admitting to any mistakes or shortcomings he alleged without becoming defensively hostile. Third, I would try to identify the sender of the message, as they might have crucial information. After splashing cold water on my face and taking several calming breaths, I returned to Marcus's office with heightened awareness. "Sorry about that," I said pleasantly, as I resumed my seat. "Where were we?" Marcus shuffled his papers. "We were discussing your communication issues with the team. Can you think of specific ways you might improve in that area?" I noticed how he phrased the question to elicit an admission of fault. Instead of denying the premise entirely, which might make me appear uncooperative, I pivoted. Communication is always an area where everyone can grow, I replied carefully. I've actually been implementing some new strategies lately, like my weekly update emails and the shared project tracker that's improved visibility across departments. The feedback on those initiatives has been quite positive. A flash of annoyance crossed Marcus's face before he masked it. He clearly hadn't gotten the self-incriminating response he wanted. Yet the Henderson campaign launched a week behind schedule, he countered. That suggests a breakdown in communication, wouldn't you agree? This was an outright fabrication. The Henderson campaign had launched exactly on time, and I had the confirmation emails to prove it. Actually, our records show the Henderson campaign launched on April 15th precisely as scheduled, Kamina. I corrected politely. I have the client sign off and launch confirmation in my files, if you'd like to review them. While Marcus formulated his response, I scanned the office more deliberately. The black object I'd noticed earlier was partially visible behind the books on his shelf. From my new angle, I could see it was definitely a small recording device, the kind journalists use for interviews. So he wasn't just recording with his phone, but creating multiple records of this conversation. Perhaps I'm thinking of a different timeline, Marcus conceded reluctantly. Let's move on to budget management. He turned to his computer, and while he was momentarily distracted, I glanced toward his notepad. Upside down, I could make out what appeared to be a checklist with items like admission of Henderson delays and acknowledged communication issues. Next to these were empty checkboxes, presumably to be marked when he successfully extracted the desired responses from me. The anonymous texter was right. This wasn't a performance review, but a carefully orchestrated attempt to build a termination case. Just then, Marcus's desk phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. I need to take this. It's Richard. Give me a moment. He stepped outside his office, closing the door behind him, but remaining visible through the glass walls as he took the call in the hallway. This was my chance. I quickly moved around to his side of the desk and examined his notepad more closely. What I found chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just a checklist for my review, but a comprehensive termination strategy titled Exit Plan for DW, with bullet points, including document performance issues, fabricate if necessary, collect recordings of admissions, F. Jessica, prepare final paperwork, coordinate with IT, to revoke access immediately, schedule for Friday before stock, options vest. The last item was particularly revealing. My 5-year stock options would vest the following week, which would represent a significant financial benefit. By terminating me just before that date, the company would save considerable money. I quickly used my phone to take pictures of the notepad and several other documents on his desk, including what appeared to be edited versions of my reports with errors inserted. I had just returned to my seat when Marcus concluded his call and re-entered the office. Sorry about that, he said, settling back into his chair. Where were we? I smiled politely, my mind reeling from what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about my performance review anymore. It was about something much bigger and more calculating than I had imagined. We were discussing budget management. I reminded him, maintaining a calm exterior despite my racing heart. Right, Marcus said, shuffling through papers in my file. According to our records, the Zimmer project exceeded budget by 18%. That's well above our acceptable threshold of 5%. Another fabrication. The Zimmer campaign had come in 2% under budget, a fact I'd highlighted in my quarterly report. I have the final expense report for Zimmer right here, I said, pulling the document from my portfolio. It shows we actually came in under budget. These figures were verified by accounting. Marcus barely glanced at the report I offered. That's not what our system shows. Perhaps you submitted a revised version without proper approval. All budget reports go through 3 approval levels, including finance, I countered. There would be an electronic trail of any revisions. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. Let's move on to a more serious concern. There have been allegations of project sabotage. Sabotage, I echoed, genuinely shocked. What exactly are you suggesting? The Parkview presentation files were corrupted hours before the client meeting. IT traced the last access to your credentials. This was beyond distortion. It was an outright lie. I hadn't even been in the office the day of that incident. I had been presenting at a marketing conference which Marcus himself had approved. That's impossible, I said firmly. I was at the Digital Marketing Summit that entire day presenting our case study. There are dozens of witnesses, including industry colleagues and our own team members who attended. Before Marcus could respond, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down to see another message from the unknown number. Don't sign anything. He's going to bring up policy violations next. Jessica has fake documentation ready. Ask for specific examples with dates and times. Marcus noticed my attention to the phone. Is someone coaching you through this review, Dana? His tone was accusatory with an undercurrent of concern that his plan might be exposed. Just my doctor confirming my appointment, I replied smoothly. You were saying about alleged sabotage. His eyes narrowed. Your phone seems quite active today. Company policy restricts personal communications during official meetings. I'll need to see those messages to ensure they're not related to confidential company matters. This was a transparent attempt to discover who might be warning me. I placed my phone face down on my lap. I'm afraid that would violate my privacy rights. My personal communications are protected even on company premises, according to our own Employee Handbook Section 12, Paragraph 3. Marcus's face flushed slightly. He hadn't expected me to cite company policy back at him. When an employee is under investigation for potential corporate espionage, certain privacy protections are waived. Corporate espionage, I kept my voice level despite my shock. That's the first I'm hearing of such an investigation. I'd like to know when this investigation was initiated, who authorized it, and see the formal documentation. As you know, such investigations require board approval and formal notice to the employee. Marcus's jaw tightened. He pressed an intercom button on his phone. Jessica, could you join us, please? Within seconds, Jessica appeared at the door looking unsurprised, as if she'd been waiting nearby for just this summons. Her tailored gray suit and perfectly styled blonde hair gave her the appearance of authority, but her slightly too eager expression betrayed her anticipation of the drama about to unfold. Jessica, Dana is questioning the validity of our investigation. Perhaps you could clarify the situation for her. Jessica placed a folder on Marcus's desk. We have emails sent from your company account to our competitor Meridian Digital containing proprietary campaign strategies. She pulled out several printed emails that appeared to be from my account. I examined the emails without touching them. They were indeed from my email address, but I had never written or sent them. The language didn't even sound like me, using phrases and acronyms I never employed. These are fabricated, I stated flatly. I never sent these emails. They came from your account, Jessica insisted. The timestamps and server logs confirm it. Then someone accessed my account without authorization, I countered. I want IT security involved immediately, and I want a forensic analysis of the login data, IP addresses, and device information for these emails. Jessica exchanged a quick glance with Marcus. This request clearly wasn't part of their script. That won't be necessary, Marcus said dismissively. The evidence is clear. At this point, we're offering you the courtesy of resignation rather than termination for cause. He slid a document across the desk toward me. This separation agreement includes 2 weeks of severance provided you waive all claims against the company and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The audacity of their scheme left me momentarily speechless. They had systematically created a false narrative of incompetence and misconduct, and now expected me to quietly accept defeat and walk away, just days before my stock options vested. The tension in the room was palpable. Jessica stood with arms crossed, watching me expectantly. Marcus had his pen ready, anticipating my surrender. Through the glass walls, I could see Ryan hovering nearby, barely concealing his interest in the proceedings. I need some time to process this, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady as anger and hurt threatened to overwhelm me. I'd like to take a break before we continue this discussion. That's not how this works, Jessica said coldly. We need your decision now. The resignation offer expires when you leave this room. I stood up, gathering my portfolio and phone. Then it expires. I'll be taking the break I'm entitled to under labor laws. 30 minutes of uninterrupted break time for every 5 hours worked is mandated by state regulations. I haven't taken my break yet today. Before either of them could protest further, I walked out of the office, head held high despite the emotional turmoil raging inside me. I needed space to think, to plan my next move in a game I hadn't even known I was playing until today. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back and hear the hushed, urgent conversation beginning behind me. Whatever they had planned, it was clear they hadn't expected resistance, and now they would be scrambling to adjust their strategy while I formulated mine. I made my way to the break room on the opposite side of the floor, as far from Marcus's office as possible. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't really want just to have something to do. The room was mercifully empty, giving me space to process the shocking turn of events. Or so I thought until the door opened, and Emily from accounting slipped in, looking nervously over her shoulder before approaching me. "It was you," I said quietly, realization dawning. "You sent the warning texts." Emily nodded her eyes, darting to the door to ensure we were still alone. "I did. I'm sorry I couldn't be more direct, but they monitor the internal messaging system, and I was afraid of being seen talking to you today." "How did you know what they were planning?" I asked, gesturing for her to sit at the small table in the corner away from the door. Emily pulled out her phone and showed me a secure messaging app. "I've been gathering evidence for weeks. It started accidentally. I was working late one night finalizing the quarterly reports when I overheard Marcus and Jessica in the conference room. They didn't know anyone else was still in the office." She pulled up a voice recording and hit play. Marcus's voice came through clearly. "We need to handle Johnson and Williams before the vesting date. Richard is clear about keeping the options pool as small as possible for the next funding round." Jessica's response was equally chilling. "Williams will be easier. She's too trusting and we've already laid the groundwork with some documentation issues." Emily stopped the recording. "Johnson was Linda. She was pushed out the same way they're trying to do to you just before her options vested. And there are others. At least 6 employees in the past year, all terminated or pressured to resign just before reaching significant benefits milestones." I felt sick. "So this isn't personal, it's financial." "Exactly," Emily confirmed, showing me spreadsheets on her phone. "The company is struggling despite the success story they project. The last 2 rounds of funding came with strict conditions. One way they're cutting costs is by preventing employees from vesting their stock options. The money stays in the options pool for executive compensation and to show investors a healthier balance sheet." "But that's illegal," I protested. "They can't terminate employees without cause just to prevent vested benefits." "It's illegal but hard to prove without evidence," Emily agreed. "They're careful to create a paper trail of performance issues and policy violations. Most people just take the resignation offer rather than fight it, especially with the threat of a negative reference or legal action hanging over them." I thought of Ryan hovering near Marcus's office. "Is Ryan part of this?" Emily nodded grimly. "He's their willing accomplice. In exchange for helping set you up, he gets your position and a guarantee that his own options will vest. They've done this before with other employees, finding someone willing to betray their colleagues for advancement." She pulled out a USB drive and handed it to me. "This contains everything I've gathered. Altered documents with metadata showing the changes, recordings of conversations, a pattern of terminations, correlated with vesting schedules and emails I recovered from the server backups that show coordination between Marcus, Jessica, and executives." "Why are you helping me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You're putting yourself at risk." Emily's expression hardened. "Because it's wrong and because I'm next on their list. My vesting date is in 3 months. I've already noticed strange errors appearing in my work and meetings being scheduled without my knowledge. But they don't know I have access to the accounting servers and backup archives as part of my job." She showed me additional documents, revealing the company's true financial position, which was far more precarious than anyone realized. Recent product launches had underperformed, and customer retention was dropping. The public success story was largely fabricated to keep investors and employees from jumping ship. "There's more," Emily continued. "You're not alone in this fight. I've been in contact with Linda and 2 other former employees who were pushed out. They've been afraid to come forward individually, but collectively with evidence they're willing to testify about what happened to them." "So, what's our plan?" I asked, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, replacing my earlier shock. "First, we need to secure more evidence," Emily said. "I have my recordings and documents. You have the photos from Marcus's desk, but we need the smoking gun that ties it all together. Alan in IT can help us. He's been suspicious of the unusual account access patterns, but hasn't had enough evidence to raise concerns officially. Alan was a quiet, bearded man who managed our server infrastructure. He kept to himself, but had always been helpful when I needed technical assistance." "Can we trust him?" I asked cautiously. "Yes," Emily assured me. "His review is next month, and he's already noticed strange access logs for his accounts. He's prepared a special monitoring tool that can track who accesses your emails in real time and from which devices. We quickly formulated a plan. I would return to Marcus's office and continue the review, but this time with my own recording device active. Emily would contact Alan to pull the server logs, showing who had actually sent those fabricated emails from my account. She would also reach out to Linda and the other former employees to prepare statements. One more thing Emily said before we parted. Whatever you do, don't sign anything, even if they threaten immediate termination. Once you sign their agreement, you waive all rights to legal action, and the non-disclosure agreement would prevent you from exposing what they've done. I nodded, feeling a strange calm replace my earlier panic. Knowledge was power, and for the first time since receiving that mysterious text, I felt like I had some control over the situation. Thank you, I told Emily sincerely. You took a huge risk warning me. We have to look out for each other, she replied with a small smile. They're counting on us being too afraid or too isolated to fight back. As I walked back toward Marcus's office, I activated the recording app on my phone and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I was no longer walking into an ambush unprepared. This time, I was the one with the plan. I knocked on Marcus's door with a confidence that visibly surprised him when he looked up. Jessica was still there, and they appeared to have been in the middle of an intense discussion that abruptly halted when I entered. I apologize for needing that break, I said, taking my seat with a pleasant smile. This has been quite unexpected, and I needed a moment to collect my thoughts. Marcus and Jessica exchanged glances clearly, trying to read my surprisingly composed demeanor. Have you considered our offer? Marcus asked, pushing the resignation document toward me again. I have, I replied calmly. And I do have some questions about the performance issues you've raised. I'd like to understand them better so I can learn from this experience. My cooperative tone seemed to relax them both slightly. They probably assumed I was negotiating for a better severance package, rather than challenging the fabricated allegations. Of course, Marcus said, adopting a mentoring tone that rang false after everything I now knew. The primary concerns were the budget overruns and the communication breakdowns we discussed earlier. About those budget reports, I said thoughtfully. Could you tell me exactly when the discrepancies were first noticed? Was it during the regular monthly review, or some other time? Marcus hesitated, unprepared for specific questions rather than defensive denials. They were flagged during our quarterly audit. By whom I pressed gently. Was it the finance team, or did someone else bring it to your attention? That's not relevant to our current discussion, Jessica interjected sharply. I'm just trying to understand the process, I said innocently. After all, if there were genuine issues with my work, I want to know how they slipped past the multiple approval checkpoints we have in place. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The specifics are confidential. What matters is that the problems were documented and persistent. Documented by whom, I continued, my voice still pleasant but increasingly pointed, because I have copies of all my submitted reports with approval signatures, and none contain the errors you're describing. Records can be altered, Jessica said dismissively, then immediately seemed to regret her choice of words. Yes, they certainly can be. I agreed, looking directly at her. Which is why original metadata and access logs are so important for verification. Don't you agree? The atmosphere in the room had shifted. Marcus was no longer controlling the conversation as I had strategically moved from defense to subtle offense. Let's discuss the company's financial situation, I suggested, changing topics abruptly. I understand there have been some challenges meeting the benchmarks promised to investors. Marcus's face paled slightly. The company's financial standing is strong. Where did you hear otherwise? I'm in marketing, I reminded him with a smile. Part of my job is understanding our market position relative to competitors and investor expectations. The last quarterly report showed some concerning trends in customer retention and new acquisition costs. This was based on legitimate public information, but Marcus's reaction suggested Emily's revelations about the company's precarious finances were accurate. Those figures were taken out of context, he said tersely. We're in a strategic repositioning phase. Of course, I nodded, and I imagine cost control is a major priority during such phases. Things like compensation packages, benefits, and stock option pools must be carefully managed. Jessica stood suddenly. This has gone far enough. You're clearly not taking this situation seriously. I'll prepare the termination paperwork instead of the resignation offer. She left the room and returned moments later with a different set of documents, slapping them on the desk with poorly concealed frustration. "Sign these," she demanded. "We're terminating your employment effective immediately for cause, including insubordination and violation of confidentiality agreements." I made a show of reading through the documents carefully. These claim I've admitted to performance failures and policy violations during this meeting. That's not accurate. It reflects the substance of our discussion, Marcus insisted. "Does it?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Because I've been recording this entire conversation just as you have been recording me. The difference is I've been transparent about it now while you concealed your recording devices." Marcus's face contorted with anger. "Recording without consent is illegal. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation they're part of." I corrected him. "And Company Policy Section 21.3 explicitly permits employees to record performance reviews for their personal records." I checked before returning to this meeting. I signed the termination papers with a flourish and slid them back across the desk. Marcus looked confused by my compliance after my obvious resistance. "I'm glad these are signed," I said pleasantly. "There'll be important evidence in the wrongful termination and fraud case I'll be filing." "What are you talking about?" Jessica demanded, but there was a new note of uncertainty in her voice. "I know everything I stated simply. The systematic targeting of employees before their stock options vest, the fabricated performance issues, the altered documents, the unauthorized access to employee accounts to create false evidence." I placed my phone on the desk screen up, showing the photos I'd taken of Marcus's notepad with the exit plan clearly visible. "That's company property you photographed without permission." Marcus sputtered, reaching for my phone. "Don't touch my personal property," I warned. "And you should know that these images have already been backed up to a secure cloud location." At that moment, the office door opened, and Alan from IT entered without knocking. His usual rumpled appearance and avoidant demeanor were replaced by purposeful confidence. "Excuse the interruption," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I have some urgent security information." He placed a folder on Marcus's desk. "These are the access logs for Dana's email account. The messages sent to Meridian Digital originated from an IP address registered to Jessica's workstation, not Dana's. The user credentials were entered manually rather than through saved authentication, suggesting deliberate impersonation." Marcus and Jessica stared at the logs in stunned silence. The door opened again and Emily walked in, followed by Richard, the CEO, and Theodore, the company's general counsel. Behind them were two people I recognized from photos Emily had shown me: Linda, my predecessor, and Michael, another former employee, who had been terminated under suspicious circumstances. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, looking at the crowded office with confusion. "We have evidence of systematic fraud and labor law violations," I said clearly. "Marcus and Jessica have been falsifying performance records and manufacturing policy violations to terminate employees just before their stock options vest, saving the company money at the expense of people who earned those benefits." Theodore, the lawyer, looked alarmed. "Those are serious allegations. What evidence do you have?" Emily stepped forward with her USB drive and phone. "I have recordings of Marcus and Jessica explicitly discussing this strategy, altered documents with metadata showing unauthorized changes, a statistical analysis showing the correlation between terminations and vesting dates, and testimony from multiple affected former employees." Linda nodded grimly. "I was told I was being let go for performance issues that never existed 1 week before my 7-year options would have vested. And now they're doing the same to Dana," Emily continued. "We have the written plan detailing their intention to terminate her before her 5-year vesting date next week." Richard's face had grown increasingly pale as the evidence mounted. As a CEO, he might have approved cost-cutting measures, but the specific illegal implementation created significant legal liability for the company. "Theodore, I want a full investigation," he ordered. "Marcus, Jessica, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately pending the results." "This is absurd," Marcus protested. "They're conspiring against us with fabricated evidence." "The irony of that accusation isn't lost on anyone here," I observed quietly. As Marcus and Jessica were escorted out by security, Theodore turned to me. "Miss Williams, on behalf of the company, I want to express our deep concern about these allegations." If what you're saying is true, we will take appropriate action and make proper restitution. Starting with ensuring all improperly terminated employees receive their vested benefits retroactively, I suggested firmly. We'll need to review everything, but yes, that would be the appropriate remedy. Theodore agreed, looking thoroughly unsettled by the potential legal and financial implications. Richard approached me with an awkward attempt at damage control. Dana, in light of these concerning allegations, I'd like to offer you Linda's former position as department director, with an appropriate adjustment to your compensation package, of course. The offer was tempting. After 5 years of hard work, the promotion I'd deserved was finally being offered. But the events of the day had fundamentally changed my perspective on Apex Technologies and its leadership. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'll need some time to consider my options. As the impromptu meeting broke up, Emily caught my eye and gave me a small, satisfied smile. Against considerable odds, we had exposed the truth and stopped a corrupt system that had harmed multiple careers. Whatever came next, we had stood up for what was right, and that felt like the biggest victory of all. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of activity. An external auditing firm was brought in to investigate the full extent of the fraudulent practices at Apex Technologies. Their preliminary findings confirmed everything we had uncovered and revealed even more. In total, 11 employees had been wrongfully terminated just before reaching significant benefits milestones over the past 2 years. The scheme had saved the company approximately $2 million in stock options and benefits, but would now cost them far more in settlements, legal fees, and damaged reputation. Marcus and Jessica were placed on administrative leave initially, but both were formally terminated once the external investigation confirmed their actions. Ryan, who had been an accomplice in their schemes, resigned before he could be fired, apparently hoping to salvage his professional reputation. Richard, the CEO, managed to distance himself from the scandal by claiming ignorance of the specific methods being used to cut costs. However, several board members questioned how he could have been unaware of such a systematic pattern of fraud within his executive team. His authority was significantly diminished, and the board appointed a co-owner to oversee operations while rebuilding trust within the company. As for me, I declined the promotion offer from Richard. After much reflection, I realized I no longer wanted to work for a company where such corruption had been allowed to flourish. Instead, I negotiated a generous settlement package that included immediate vesting of all my stock options, compensation for emotional distress, and a clean employment record with a positive reference. Emily was offered and accepted a newly created position as compliance officer responsible for ensuring ethical business practices and proper employee protections. With her background in accounting and her demonstrated integrity, she was the perfect person to prevent similar abuses in the future. Alan from IT received a promotion and was tasked with improving security protocols to prevent unauthorized access to employee accounts and data. The changes he implemented made it impossible for anyone, even executives, to alter records without a transparent approval process and permanent audit trail. The most meaningful outcome for me personally was connecting with the other victims of Marcus and Jessica's scheme. Linda, Michael, and the others had all moved on to new positions, but carried emotional scars from their abrupt and unjust terminations. Many had questioned their own abilities and worth after being gaslit about their performance. We formed an informal support group meeting monthly for dinner to share our experiences and healing journeys. What began as a way to process workplace trauma evolved into genuine friendships and a powerful professional network spanning multiple industries. In the months that followed, I found myself reflecting often on the warning signs I had ignored. The missing files, the altered documents, the strange conversations that stopped when I entered a room. All these were red flags I had dismissed in my dedication to a job that didn't deserve such loyalty. I had wanted so badly to believe in the company and my place within it that I had rationalized away my own valid concerns. 6 months after leaving Apex, I used part of my settlement to launch my own marketing consultancy. My business plan centered around transparency, ethical practices, and fair compensation, all values that had been lacking at my former employer. I implemented clear documentation policies, collaborative work processes, and a profit-sharing model that rewarded everyone's contributions. Emily became my first client, hiring my firm to redesign Apex's internal communications as part of their corporate rebuilding efforts. Linda referred several of her connections, and soon my client roster included companies seeking not just marketing expertise but ethical business practices. When I think back to that fateful performance review, I'm amazed at how a single text message changed the trajectory of my career and life. Had I not received that warning, I might have been blindsided by the termination, left questioning my own competence, and without the evidence needed to fight back. The experience taught me several invaluable lessons. First, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't immediately identify the problem. The human mind is remarkably good at detecting patterns and inconsistencies, even when we can't consciously articulate them. Second, documentation is power. Had Emily Allen and I not systematically gathered evidence, it would have been our word against that of established executives. The contemporaneous records, metadata, and recordings provided irrefutable proof that transformed accusations into facts. Third, workplace allies are essential. None of us could have successfully challenged the corrupt system alone, but together we created a force strong enough to topple entrenched power structures. Finding people of integrity who will stand with you makes all the difference between vulnerability and resilience. Finally, I learned that sometimes what initially seems like a devastating professional setback can become the catalyst for positive transformation. Had I received the promotion I originally sought, I would have remained in a toxic environment, perhaps eventually becoming part of the problem rather than the solution. Instead, being targeted led me to discover my own strength, create a business aligned with my values, and help others who face similar injustice. Now, when I interview potential team members for my growing company, I share a version of my story, not to dwell on past wrongs, but to establish the foundation of honesty and ethical conduct that defines our work culture. I want everyone who works with me to know they'll be valued for their contributions, protected from exploitation, and empowered to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. The text message that began, "Don't react. Your boss is recording everything," ultimately led to a complete reinvention of my professional life and a deeper understanding of my own worth. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives arrive disguised as disasters, and the path forward only becomes clear when we're forced to leave the familiar behind. Have you ever experienced workplace injustice or received information that completely changed your perspective? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges at work. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't just about personal vindication. It's about creating healthier workplaces for everyone. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to advocate for yourself when it matters most.